Good evening. I'm James Hoge, editor of the Chicago Sun-Times and moderator of this third of the historic debates of the 1976 campaign. Tonight we have the vice presidential candidates. For the Democrats, Senator Walter Mondale of Minnesota. For the Republicans, Senator Robert Dole of Kansas. Thank you, Senator Mondale, and thank you, Senator Dole, for being with us this evening. This debate is taking place before an audience in the Alley Theater in Houston, Texas. It is also being broadcast by radio and television to an audience estimated at some 85 million persons in this nation and overseas.
October 15th, 1976, the first nationally televised formal vice presidential debate, Walter Mondale versus Bob Dole. There have been 10 more VP debates since that first one nearly half a century ago. Now we're just days away from the 12th vice presidential debate, JD Vance versus Tim Walz. In this episode of C-SPAN's podcast, The Weekly, we look back at the first 11 VP debates and remember the top, most famous, most newsmaking, most notable, legendary, funniest, and otherwise best of moments and zingers from each of them.
Do you know any social studies, media, or literature teachers in grades 6 through 12? Encourage them to participate in C-SPAN's Student Cam video documentary competition. With the upcoming November election, we're asking young people to address the theme, Your Message to the President. What issue is most important to you or your community? $100,000 in cash prizes will be awarded to students and teachers. To learn more, go to studentcam.org.
For our first best of moment from a vice presidential debate, we return to that first one, 1976, prompted by this question from Walter Mears of the Associated Press.
Senator Dole, 10 days ago when Senator Mondale raised the issues of Watergate and the Nixon pardon, you called it the start of the campaign mudslinging. 2 years ago when you were running for the Senate, you said that the pardon was prematurely granted and that it was a mistake. You were quoted by the Kansas City Times as saying, "You can't ignore our tradition of equal application of the law." Did you approve of the Nixon pardon when President Ford granted it? Do you approve of it now? And if the issue was fair game in your 1974 campaign in Kansas, why is it not an appropriate topic now?
Well, it is an appropriate topic, I guess, but it's not a very good issue any more than the war in Vietnam would be, or World War II, or World War I, or the war in Korea. All Democrat wars, all in this century. I figured up the other day, if we added up the killed and wounded in Democrat wars in this century, it'd be about 1.6 million Americans, enough to fill the city of Detroit. Now, if we want to go back and rake that over and over and over, we can do that. I assume Senator Mondale doesn't want to do that. But it seems to me that the pardon of Richard Nixon is behind us. Watergate's behind us. If we have this vision for America, and if we're really concerned about those people out there and their problems, yes, and their education and their jobs, we ought to be talking about that. I know it strikes a responsive chord for some to kick Richard Nixon around. I don't know how long you can keep that up. How much mileage is there in someone who's been kicked, whose wife suffered a serious stroke, who's been disgraced in office and stepped down from that office? And I think after 2 years and some months that it's probably a dead issue. But let them play that game. That's the only game they know.
Senator Mondale.
I think Senator Dole has richly earned his reputation as a hatchet man tonight by implying and stating that World War II and the Korean War were democratic wars. Does he really mean to suggest to the American people that there was a partisan difference over our involvement in the war to fight Nazi Germany? I don't think any reasonable American would accept that. Does he really mean to suggest that it was only partisanship that got us into the war in Korea? Does he really mean to forget that part of the record where Mr. Nixon and the Republican Party wanted us to get involved earlier in the war in Vietnam? And long after Mr. Nixon and the Republican Party promised to finish the war in Vietnam, they kept urging us forward, and that in fact it was the Democratic Congress that passed the law ending the war in Vietnam and preventing a new war in Angola.
The second VP debate, 1984, Republican Vice President George Bush versus Democratic Congresswoman from New York, Geraldine Ferraro. The order of questions was determined by the flip of a coin. Here's one from Robert Boyd, Washington Bureau Chief for Knight Ridder Newspapers.
Congresswoman Ferraro, You have had little or no experience in military matters, and yet you might someday find yourself Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. How can you convince the American people and a potential enemy that you would know what to do to protect this nation's security? And do you think in any way that the Soviets might be tempted to try to take advantage of you simply because you are a woman?
Are you saying that I would have to have fought in a war in order to love peace?
I'm not saying that. I'm asking you. You know what I asked.
All right. I think what happens is when you try to equate whether or not I've had military experience, that's the natural conclusion. It's about as valid as saying that you would have to be black in order to despise racism, that you'd have to be female in order to be terribly offended by sexism. That's just not so. I think if you take a look at where I've been, both in the Congress and where I intend to go, the type of person I am, I think that the people of this country can rely upon the fact that I will be a leader.
There was also this exchange between Geraldine Ferraro and George Bush.
Let me help you with the difference, Ms. Ferraro, between Iran and the embassy in Lebanon. Iran, we were held by a foreign government. In Lebanon, you had a wanton terrorist action where the government opposed it. We went to Lebanon to give peace a chance, to stop the bombing of civilians in Beirut, to remove 13,000 terrorists from Lebanon. We did. We saw the formation of a government of reconciliation, and for somebody to suggest, as our two opponents have, that these men died in shame, they better not tell the parents of those young Marines. They gave peace a chance, and our allies were with us, the British, the French, and the Italians.
Congresswoman Ferraro.
Let me just say, first of all, that I almost resent Vice President Bush, your patronizing attitude that you have to teach me about foreign policy. I've been a member of Congress for 6 years. I was there when the embassy was held hostage in Iran, and I have been there and I have seen what has happened in the past several months, 17 months with your administration.
1988, Republican Dan Quail versus Democrat Lloyd Benson, two senators, and one exchange that stands out among the most legendary of any debate, presidential or vice presidential. It came after Dan Quail was asked for the third time about his qualifications for being a heartbeat away from the presidency.
And I will be prepared to do that. I will be prepared not only because of my service in the Congress, but because of my ability to communicate and to lead. It is not just age, it's accomplishments, it's experience. I have far more experience than many others that sought the office of Vice President of this country. I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency. I will be prepared to deal with the people in the Bush administration if that unfortunate event would ever occur.
Senator Benson.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy. What has to be done in a situation like that? In a situation like that,
you're only taking time
is to call in the joint.
Your own candidate.
That was really uncalled for, Senator.
You're the one that was making the comparison, Senator, and I'm one who knew him well. And frankly, I think you're so far apart in the objectives you choose for your country that I did not think the comparison was well taken.
Vice President Dan Quail returned for the 1992 debate. He was joined by Democrat Al Gore and a third candidate, Independent Ross Perot's running mate, James Stockdale. A newcomer to politics, but a war hero. James Stockdale was a United States Navy Vice Admiral and aviator. In the Vietnam War, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. A prisoner of war for over 7 years, he was the most senior naval officer held captive in the Hanoi Hilton, where John McCain also was a prisoner. But James Stockdale might be most famous for the first thing he said at the 1992 vice presidential debate.
Admiral Stockdale, your opening statement, please, sir.
Who am I?
Why am I here? I'm not a politician. Everybody knows that. So don't expect me to use the language of the Washington Insider. 37 years in the Navy, and only one of them up there in Washington. And now I'm an academic. The centerpiece of my life was the Vietnam War. I was there the day it started. I led the first bombing raid against North Vietnam. I was there the day it ended, and I was there for everything in between. 10 years in Vietnam, aerial combat, and torture. I know things about the Vietnam War better than anybody in the world. I know some things about the Vietnam War better than anybody in the world. And I know how governments, how American governments can be courageous and how they can be callow. And that's important. That's one thing I'm an insider on.
Admiral Stockdale also got a laugh when Al Gore and Dan Quail were going at it over abortion.
Can we give Admiral Stockdale a chance to jump in here if he wants to or if he dares to?
I would like to get in. I feel like I'm an observer at a ping pong game where they're talking about, they're expert professional politicians that massage these intricate plots and know every nuance to them. And meantime, we're facing a desperate situation in our economy. I've seen the cost of living double in my lifetime. A new granddaughter was born in my family, my granddaughter, 3 weeks ago. And according to the statistics that we have, that is the Perot group, the chances of her seeing a doubling of the standard of living are nil. In fact, her children will be dead before another this standard of living is doubled. So what the heck? Let's get on with talking about something substantive.
Vice President Al Gore returned for the 1996 debate against Bob Dole's running mate, Jack Kemp. Running mates traditionally play the role of the attack dog, slashing and going negative on the opposing ticket. But with these opening remarks, Jack Kemp went in a different direction.
So, we go now to the first question and to Mr. Kemp.
Jim?
Some supporters of Senator Dole have expressed disappointment over his unwillingness in Hartford Sunday night to draw personal and ethical differences between him and President Clinton. How do you feel about it?
Wow. In 90 seconds? I can't clear my throat in 90 seconds. Jim, Bob Dole and myself do not see Al Gore and Bill Clinton as our enemy. We see them as our opponents. This is the greatest democracy in the world. People are watching not only throughout this country, but all over the world as to how this democracy can function with civility and respect and decency and integrity. Bob Dole is one of those men who served in the United States Senate. His public life is a public record. He fought on the battlefield. He has worked with Democrats and Republicans. In my opinion, it is beneath Bob Dole to go after anyone personally. Clearly, Abraham Lincoln put it best when he said, "You serve your party best by serving the nation first."
An identical approach and nearly identical words opened the 2000 vice presidential debate. Going up against Republican Dick Cheney, here's how Democrat Joe Lieberman began.
My 85-year-old mom gave me some good advice about the debate earlier today. She said, sweetheart, as she is prone to call me, remember, be positive and know that I will love you no matter what your opponent says about you. Well, Mom, as always, that was both reassuring and wise. I am going to be positive tonight. I'm not going to indulge in negative personal attacks. I'm going to talk about the issues that I know matter to the people of this country: education, health care, retirement security, and moral values.
2000 also marked the first time same-sex marriage was a topic in a vice presidential debate. It would be a topic for 3 straight VP debates. Here's what both candidates said.
The question you pose is a difficult one for this reason. It confronts or challenges the traditional notion of marriage as being limited to a heterosexual couple, which I support. But I must say I'm thinking about this because I have friends who are in gay and lesbian partnerships who've said to me, isn't it unfair that we don't have similar legal rights to inheritance, to visitation when one of the partners is ill, to health care benefits? And that's why I'm thinking about it, and my mind is open to taking some action that will address those elements of unfairness while respecting the traditional religious and civil institution of marriage.
Mr. Secretary. This is a tough one, Bernie. The fact of the matter is we live in a free society, and freedom means freedom for everybody. We don't get to choose and shouldn't be able to choose and say you get to live free but you don't. And I think that means that people should be free to enter into any kind of relationship they want to enter into. It's really no one else's business in terms of trying to regulate or prohibit behavior in that regard. The next step then, of course, is the question you ask of whether or not there ought to be some kind of official sanction, if you will, of the relationship, or if these relationships should be treated the same way a conventional marriage is. That's a tougher problem. That's not a slam dunk. I think the fact of the matter, of course, is that matters are regulated by the states. I think different states are likely to come to different conclusions, and that's appropriate. I don't think there should necessarily be a federal policy in this area. I try to be open-minded about it as much as I can and tolerant of those relationships. And like Joe, I'm also wrestle with the extent to which there ought to be legal sanction of those relationships. I think we ought to do everything we can to tolerate and accommodate whatever kind of relationships people want to enter into.
Vice President Dick Cheney returned for the 2004 debate. During the discussion on same-sex marriage, his Democratic opponent, Senator John Edwards, invoked Dick Cheney's daughter, and he expressed a position which seems out of step with where Democrats are now.
Now, as to this question, let me say first that I think the Vice President and his wife love their daughter. I think they love her very much. And you can't have anything but respect for the fact that they're willing to talk about the fact that they have a gay daughter, the fact that they embrace her. Is a wonderful thing. And there are millions of parents like that who love their children, who want their children to be happy. And I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and so does John Kerry.
4 years later, a similar statement on gay marriage from another Democrat running for vice president. Here's how Joe Biden responded to a question from Gwen Ifill.
Let's try to avoid nuance, Senator.
Do
you support gay marriage?
No. Barack Obama nor I support redefining from a civil side what constitutes marriage. We do not support that. That is basically a decision to be able to be left to the faith and people who practice their faith determination what you call it.
By the way, Joe Biden's opponent in that 2008 debate was Alaska Governor Sarah Palin. When the two candidates were introduced and came on stage, the microphones picked up Sarah Palin asking Joe Biden a personal question.
Nice to meet you. Hey, can I call you Joe? Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Gwen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Vice President Joe Biden was back for the 2012 debate. His Republican opponent, Congressman Paul Ryan. That debate was historic because, for the first time, two Catholic candidates shared the stage. Abortion was a topic. Here's Joe Biden.
My religion defines who I am. And I've been a practicing Catholic my whole life. And it has particularly informed my social doctrine. Catholic social doctrine talks about taking care of those who can't take care of themselves, people who need help. With regard to abortion, I accept my church's position on abortion as what we call de fide doctrine. Life begins at conception. That's the church's judgment. I accept it in my personal life. But I refuse to impose it on equally devout Christians and Muslims and Jews, and I just refuse to impose that on others.
Abortion also came up during the 2016 debate. This heated exchange between Donald Trump's running mate Mike Pence and Hillary Clinton's running mate Tim Kaine.
And we don't think that women should be punished
as Donald Trump said they should, for making the decision to have an abortion. Governor Pence wants to repeal Roe versus Wade. He said he wants to put it on the ash heap of history, and we have some young people in the audience who weren't even born when Roe was decided. This is pretty important. Before Roe versus Wade, states could pass criminal laws to do just that, to punish women if they made the choice to terminate a pregnancy. I think you should live your moral values, but the last thing, the very last thing that government should do is have laws that would punish women who make reproductive choices. And that is the fundamental difference between a Clinton-Kaine ticket and a Trump-Pence ticket that wants to punish women who make that choice.
It's really not. Donald Trump and I would never support legislation that punished women who made the heartbreaking choice to end a pregnancy.
And why did Donald Trump say that?
We just never would.
Why did he say that?
Well, look, he's not a polished politician like you and Hillary Clinton. And so, you know,
well, I would
don't
admit
always
that's not
come out exactly the way he means them, but I'm telling you what other policy of our administration would be.
Great line from the Gospel of Matthew. From the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yeah.
When Donald Trump says women should be punished, or Mexicans are rapists and criminals,
I'm telling
or
you.
John McCain's not a hero,